let's take a look at the social customer journey. In the past, customers would have found out about your product or service through a billboard, a television or a magazine advertisement. Today, literally they're likely to find out about it scrolling through their Facebook feed. In the past, when they were looking at which companies they should buy from, they let their fingers do the walking. Anyone remember the yellow pages? Certainly I do. Today, with a couple of clicks on Google, you literally have thousands of pages of options right at your fingertips. In the past, when you wanted to buy a product or service, you walked into a brick or mortar store. Today, again, with a couple of clicks on Amazon, I can have a product delivered to my doorstep the very next day. And in the past, if something went wrong, you'd get buried in IVR trees and phone lines. And today I can take to social media and reach an audience of millions literally in a matter of minutes. And in the past, advocacy was confined to the water cooler. Still as effective as ever, I mean, good old word of mouth, but really confined to maybe tens or sometimes hundreds, depending on how big your company is. Today, virality can literally spread like wildfire. But don't just take my word for it. Let's take a look at an example of Ryan Holmes, who's the Hootsuite founder and CEO, and let's have a look at his customer journey buying a Roomba, which is one of those little electric vacuum cleaners. So Ryan first finds out about the Roomba as he's browsing YouTube, and he comes across this hilarious video of a cat dressed in a shark costume chasing a duck while riding a Roomba. And I know we're a little bit constrained for time, so in the interest of time, I actually didn't embed this video into the presentation. But if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it because it's really, really funny to watch. So Ryan tweets his friends, hey, does anybody have a Roomba that they love? He buys his Roomba, and then the unthinkable happens. His Roomba has a little bit of an altercation with his Christmas tree. Thankfully, the iRobot, who are the manufacturers of Roomba, are actually watching, and they pick up Ryan's incident, and not only do they reach out and offer to replace his Roomba, they actually offer to upgrade him to a higher value model. So Ryan has his Roomba, he's a happy camper, and he's letting everybody know about his experience. So given that today I wanted to talk a little bit about the foundations of customer support and how to plan your customer support organization, I thought I'd start by just talking a little bit about how to plan a customer support workforce model. So how to understand how many people you should employ in your business and how those people should be structured. So the first thing you really need to do is take a look at your monthly active users if you're in a SaaS business, or something like the number of orders if you're in a retail or e-commerce type of business. We then look at our historical contact rates to understand what kind of volume you can be expecting. So looking at your baseline in terms of your monthly active users or your orders, and then timesing that by how many contacts you have across all of the different channels through which you interact with your customers. So we then break that down into the different contact channels. So understanding how do you want to engage with your customers across which channels, and then understanding and making sure that you're planning for these specific channels. And of course, you need to make sure that you're looking at what is your advocate or your support agent productivity in each of those channels. So, you know, maybe your team can answer 10 Twitter or 10 Facebook comments an hour, but it takes them 20 minutes to answer each ticket or email. And so you need to make sure that you're allowing for that average handle time or that productivity per person to ensure that you have the right number of advocates. So that basic calculation gives you the number of advocates that you need in your business. And then you really want to think about what time of day and what location and what language coverage do you need at the same time. So you look at your number of advocates, and then you look at your contact arrival patterns. So when are your customers contacting you, what time of day, which day of week, because you want to make sure that you have enough people covering those times of day and days of week to make sure that you can handle the incoming volume. Then, of course, if you're operating a business in more than one language, you want to make sure that you have the adequate language coverage for your customers. And then, obviously, if there are different locations globally, If you've got a business in Europe, for example, and you want to cover your European languages and certain time zones, then it becomes important to have your advocates or your customer support reps sitting in those particular regions. So really starting to think about your regionalization and your model. The second thing is really to start to think about and tier your business in terms of how you want to support your customers and through which channels. So there are a number of different ways to support your customers. Everything in blue here really represents something that aims to deflect contacts. So what that means is you're really trying to help your customers serve themselves or get the answers to the questions that they're asking without having to engage with a real live human. And so there are things like your frequently asked questions, your knowledge base, your help center, however you want to kind of call that. The second is a customer support forum, so a community where customers can go and ask questions. Often you'll have pre-seeded questions in the forum, frequently asked questions, but you can also have customers and passionate raving fans in your support forum, who are also answering some of those questions. So it takes some of the load away from your customer support team. And then with the increase of things like artificial intelligence, we're starting to see a higher incidence of companies launching chatbots, which are another good way to automatically interact with your customers and provide a great customer experience whilst not necessarily interacting with a human. Then we get into what we call our delayed response channels, which are the green channels. So those are things like a contact us form or a lead form on the website, as well as things like just general tickets and email. So you'll have an SLA with your customers, but often that's not happening in real time. There's kind of a lag in between when a customer contacts you and when your customer support team is able to respond. And then lastly, we're getting into things like live channels such as social media, live chat and phone. And in our business, we're looking at our different tiers of customers and we're making sure that we segment our contact channels and align those to our different tiers of our customer base accordingly so as to optimize our resourcing model. And obviously you also need to set your service level agreements by contact channel. So making sure that you're setting the appropriate time and setting expectations with customers in terms of how quickly it is that you'll get back to them once they've actually submitted their request or notified you that they're having an issue. Then in terms of a customer support evolution, a lot of companies, depending on where you are in the maturity curve, a lot of companies really start with a sort of a follow the sun model. And so they start with those non-real time, those kind of delayed response channels, and they'll effectively hand those tickets off in between their different customer support teams around the world, which is why it's called follow the sun. And as those businesses kind of grow and evolve, they start moving towards more real-time interactions. So launching channels such as social, chat, and phone. And then ultimately with, the advent of kind of data analysis and a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning, companies want to be moving towards a predictive and proactive way of interacting with customers. So really surfacing and providing information to customers before they actually have to reach out to support. So as I said before, follow the sun starts really with kind of social, email and chat. And obviously that goes into phone and some forms of artificial intelligence and ultimately mobile. So you're really interacting across all of the different channels of your business, across all of those different touch points in the customer journey. And then lastly, most companies start with very small distributed teams and then move to a model where the teams are more regionalized based on the growth of the customer base. So making sure that you have teams that are aligned to where your customers are in the market and the language coverage that you need, as well as leveraging partners to kind of extend the model, and then ultimately working to grow and scale the business. So just some factors for consideration when you're thinking about your customer support organization. The first is, what is your volume? Do you need a full-time person, or can you combine somebody managing customer support with launch services or customer success, or maybe someone on your product team can pick up some of these questions depending on what your inbound volume is. The second is, how do you want your customers to contact support? Do you want them to come in just through an email channel so that you have a little bit of time lag and you have time to be able to answer your questions? Or do you want them to be able to pick up the phone and call you? And there's a lot of different factors in terms of the consideration there. There's the impact on the customer experience, obviously. Everybody would like to be able to pick up the phone and call, or a lot of people. However, resourcing something like a phone channel means you need to have a dedicated resource, like effectively sitting there ready to pick up the phone and answer those calls. So there will be a difference in the resourcing impact depending on whether you start by launching delayed response channels or live channels. So that's something that you need to think about as well. And then obviously something like social media. How are you thinking about managing, and how are you making sure that you pick up your customer inquiries on social media? What are your service level agreements? So how quickly do you want to respond to your customers? Again, if you set a 1 hour response time for customers, or if you're working in live channels, you need more people to be able to service those channels than if you're working in a delayed response channel such as emailing and tickets. Where are your customers geographically located? So again, if you have customers that are primarily centralized in one location, then it's probably very easy for you to service those customers from that location. If your customers speak multiple different languages, which is another one of our considerations, which languages do they speak, and where do you need to have folks to be able to cover those resources? And then lastly, which metrics are you going to be optimizing for? And this one, we'll talk a little bit about metrics in a few moments, but really thinking about how are you going to measure your customer support team. If you're measuring for something like customer satisfaction or first response time, that's a very different resourcing model than if you're managing to an average handle time, for example. And it's really important to understand that when you set your metrics for your customer support business, that will actually drive a lot of the behavior and motivation of the team. So if you're setting something like average handle time as one of your primary metrics, then you may be compromising your customer experience, because your agents or your advocates will be managing to hit an average handle time. And so they may not take the care and attention, depending on how aggressively you set that target, as they would if you are, for example, setting a customer satisfaction metric, where if you're setting a metric that drives for very high customer satisfaction, you may resource the business differently and forego some metrics, some hard metrics such as average handle time.